Welcome to the Venucio Novak Report and the American Political Zone. From New York, this is Frank Venucio.
And from Washington, this is Daria Novak.
And catch us while you can. Apparently, the Biden administration wants to hire private companies to monitor chatter which they consider extremist. And if we listen to American progressives, it seems that anyone who disagrees with them is an extremist.
Well, Frank, does that mean I wouldn't be able to say the Pledge of Allegiance, that I wouldn't be able to praise God online? I mean,
Well,
what
when
are
you
they
consider
calling extremists today?
It's a great point. When you consider what goes on in our public schools, um, we've had kids in the state of California who come to school wearing an American flag T-shirt, and they've been told that it's provocative, that it's insulting, that they have to go home and change. We've had kids in other schools where the kids running around the playground do, bang bang, as little boys are wont to do, and they've been told that that is somehow out of the realm of acceptability. So, all these ideas about censoring speech completely ignore the First Amendment. And I think when they talk about extremist speech, it's simply a dodge to ignore the protections of the First Amendment. Do I like it when people say things I disagree with, on the air? No, of course not. Do I think they have the right to say it? Yes, I do. Do I think that any government agency or employee of the government has the right to say, well, we consider that not appropriate, and therefore you should not be allowed to say it? Daria, that is opening the door to outright censorship, which of course is the very idea the left has. Look at what they've done in colleges.
It's very true. In colleges, students are intimidated by professors that at the beginning of a semester will tell you, read their op-ed when it's in the political science department, so you know what they're talking about. Well, when you have a professor that lets the students know what his or her political opinions are, those students then know their grade is going to be dependent. At least they fear that, and they shouldn't live under that intimidation. They fear that it will be impacted because they may not agree with the professor. So what happens? We limit creative thinking. We limit literature. We limit the arts. It's just absolutely ridiculous. And, Frank, it's now extended into the sciences, because if you don't
Yes.
agree with the hard science, if you don't agree with what they're saying, then you're an extremist. I mean, what comes to mind is the environment. There are maybe one or two or 10 or 100 causes for the change in temperatures on our planet. But if you don't adhere to what the progressive left is attributing to the causes of the planet changing temperatures, then you're an extremist, you're a denier. And there are all types of names that go along with it. I know of one case where a student was told, if you don't agree with the opinion of the professor, leave the class now because you will be flunked. What's happened to academia in this country? What's happened to the idea that you can have beneficial debates where different opinions are brought out into the open? The strong points are talked about, the weak points in the argument are talked about, and there's either an agreement to disagree or people come together and agree in a civil manner. You know what's happened, Frank? The left has said, if you don't agree with me, you don't deserve to be heard. You don't, and it goes further, you don't have a right to be heard. And we've seen that right now with President Trump in social media, where
Yeah,
he is
Facebook
literally getting banned.
Facebook continues to ban President Trump, and they had a meeting of their super double secret uh, board, which decided to continue to ban him. I think it's for the next 6 months. Um, we've seen where I believe it was Twitter, or CNN rather, that said their whole corporate plan for 2020 was to do everything possible to prevent the reelection of Donald Trump. You know, this is un-American to say the very least.
I
So,
agree. I agree.
Daria, let's go to our first guest. Dan Schneider is the executive director of the American Conservative Union, and the ACU is moving to combat corporations from giving into pressure from the radical left, and they formed the Center Protect Voters and Their Voices. Dan, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks a lot, Frank. Really glad to be with you.
Dan, we've just heard this week that President Biden wants to hire private companies to monitor what he considers extremist chat on Facebook and on other social media sites, perhaps also in the electronic media as well. We all know that American progressives consider anything that they disagree with to be extremist. How serious a threat is this to free speech?
Well, of course, it is a huge invasion of speech and other rights as well. But it's also consistent with what Biden did during the Obama administration, when they literally, at the Federal Communications Commission, tried to put cops into newsrooms to police what local television stations were going to put on the air. And now it's going to the personal level, where the Biden administration is trying to control, through the private sector, trying to control what we say, think, feel, and talk about. It's dangerous.
Have we become Red China?
Well, no, we've not become Red China, but Red China is desperately trying to make us one of their puppet states. And the Biden administration, while they seem to acknowledge the fact that China has serious problems, this administration seems perfectly content to play into the hands of the Chinese Communist Party. And look, we've got these big corporations in America who, which a couple of decades ago we could count on for standing for free markets, for freedom of the individual. But now these big corporations have decided that their future is better based on working with the Chinese Communist Party and working with the extreme left in America, doing the bidding of Stacey Abrams. And so these big corporations are no longer seeking the interests of Americans and of America. They are seeking gains through our enemies. It's really a terrible thing.
Now, the American Conservative Union has formed the Center to Protect Voters and Their Voices. And of course, that has to include looking at what H.R. 1 would do to the electoral process if indeed Congress and the Senate passes that particular piece of legislation. Wouldn't that essentially legitimize election cheating?
Right. Well, we all know what happened in the 2020 election. The radical left, using George Soros money, systematically went from state to state to remove the safeguards in our electoral system. Now, those safeguards make sure that nobody votes more than once. That is the person who votes is the person who says he or she is. That the person who votes is actually a U.S. citizen. But all those safeguards were taken down in the last election. The whole coronavirus was used as an excuse for taking down these safeguards. And now we've got these state legislatures that are saying, okay, we have to restore order to our election system so that people can have confidence in the outcome. And now the radical left is attacking all of those efforts, claiming that those efforts are racist. And the Biden administration, of course, is pushing this aggressive agenda. Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer they're going to push this through Congress, and of course this HR 1 would look, it's unconstitutional to begin with. It's the role of the states to oversee elections in their own systems, but Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, they're trying to make sure that all of the illegal conduct that took place before is codified, that it's made permanent, that there are no safeguards to our elections. And the left claims that the real purpose is to allow more legal people to vote. Well, that's false, of course. It's designed to allow more fraud to take place.
So Dan, can you explain to me this? For many years in this country, people fought for one man, one vote. Minority communities wanted African Americans to have a full vote. Yet today, when we see a lack of voter integrity, what this says to me, when you have illegals, for instance, voting, is that people are not having a full vote. The same thing when you see in the trans community now, I guess it's Jenner that came out and is saying that trans women in sports are unfair. How do the liberals in this country justify these arguments? I don't really hear anything from them. They're not seeming to protect one man, one vote or equality in sports.
Right. Well, Daria, it used to be that, that I had friends who called themselves liberal 20 years ago, 30 years ago, who believed in America, who believed in the Constitution. We just may have had different interpretations of constitutional provisions. But that's not what today's liberal is. Not, at least certainly not at the leadership level. Today's leadership of the liberals, they're leftists. So they don't care if they're destroying the Constitution. In fact, they think that the Constitution is a hindrance to achieve their goals and outcomes. So they're not afraid to burn down the House. They're not afraid to burn down the Constitution to achieve their ends. They're happy to disenfranchise legal voters so that they can get power. It's really that simple.
As part of the daily routine of the American Analysis of News and Media, which sponsors the show, newspapers and news shows around the country are monitored. And one of the most fascinating things is that the use of the label extremist is simply given to everyone who disagrees with the hard left. We've already seen what this has done to academia in the United States, not only in college levels now, but we're even seeing this in high schools and even grammar schools. When we hear more and more about knocking down what some government bureaucrat or politician considers extremist speech, how much of that is a first step in a multi-step process to really knock out all dissent to the Democrat left?
Yeah, well, this, of course, is their goal. But I want your listeners to have hope. They can learn more about AC by going to conservative.org. They can learn more about our Center to Protect Voters and Their Voices. We are out there fighting. And what we know is America, even though the radical left is taking control of the Democrat Party, everyday Americans all over the country are learning how bad things really are, that they know they've been sold a bill of goods, and Americans all over the country are saying enough. And so we are very optimistic about our nation's future. It's going to take a lot of work. We need people to volunteer and help us with this project on this new Center to Protect Voters and Their Voices. Look, ACU has been around for decades and decades. We were founded in 1964. We're the people who put on CPAC. And Frank and Daria, thank you for coming to CPAC all the time. And by the way, we will be having CPAC Part 2 in Texas, July 9th through 11th. So I hope you and your listeners will be joining us in Dallas, Texas for CPAC Part 2. But we are optimistic. We are pushing back on these woke corporations. We are winning the battle. Matt Schlapp, my chairman, and I had a great conversation with the commissioner of Major League Baseball, who has pledged no longer to get involved with the left. We are in the midst of a battle with the National Collegiate Athletic Association, the NCAA. The NCAA is pushing this transgender, effort to try to get biological men who identify as women to compete against women. And we are now engaged in a battle with the NCAA. We are winning, and the American public is going to rise up, and we're going to take back this country. We're the ones who believe in the Constitution. We're the ones who believe in the Bill of Rights. We're the ones who believe in individual freedom. And that is the right position, and right will win. So yes, things look bad at the moment, but things have looked bad at other times. And I want your listeners to know we are going to fight, and we must win. So please go to our website, conservative.org. You can find the link to the Center to Protect Voters and Their Voices. We need you to volunteer and help us.
I really do believe in what you're saying, but one of the things that I find among conservatives, some Republicans too, is that we're very individualistic in nature, unlike the left. I know personally, if somebody tells me to do something, even if I want to do it, my first instinct is to say no, I've got a mind of my own.
Mhm.
I'm not going to do what you say. What I find is that conservatives often create false divisions that are very minor among various conservative groups. So instead of working together, as you talked about, for a cause and taking back the country, we seem to create divisions, whether it's personality or power struggles or some slight difference of opinion. How do we
Mhm.
get conservatives to overlook whatever might be the various flavors of conservatism and work together in the same way, in some senses, that the left seems to be able to do?
So, Daria, one kind of interesting thing in all of this is that the radical left has huge billionaires backing their work. You know, the George Soros, Tom Steyer kind of billionaires. And because they've got so much money, and they hand that money out to these various groups. Those groups get unified because they know they've got to follow the lead of the money. That's probably the principal reason why the left is so unified. For conservatives, we don't have all these billionaires who essentially provide discipline by creating funding. Instead, groups like the American Conservative Union, we've got to ask for support, from everyday Americans to fund our efforts. And because of that, and every group like ACU does the same thing, we don't have that same sort of financial incentive to unify. So then you're asking for people to use their good judgment and ethics and integrity to unify. And people are people, and it gets difficult to get people on board sometimes. But Daria, we've got to take this opportunity when the radical left is so well organized to heal our own divisions, unify, and fight back for America.
Go ahead, Daria.
I say I'm on board.
Good.
I broadcast and live in New York State, where in addition to the Democrat and Republican parties, there is a conservative party, which is permanently on the ballot, as well as a working families party, which tends to be a hard left party. It seems that in New York State, the tiny and relatively underfunded conservative party accomplishes more than the Republican Party as a whole. Now, one of the things that both Daria and I have noticed from our research is that when a left-wing group on a college campus, a Democratic Party group on a college campus, decides to have an event, that they're well-funded, just as you were mentioning before. Democrats will supply the food, they'll supply a speaker, perhaps even music. When a bunch of conservative kids or Republican kids on a college campus want to have an event, they're lucky if they have one representative from a local Republican party wave at them as they go by. Have Republicans kind of missed the boat on building a brand and building an enthusiasm for conservatism, which really should be a lot more popular, particularly among the young, since it talks about free will, it talks about opportunity, it talks about being able to live your own life as you see fit. But it seems that the Republican Party, frankly, has been less vigorous in doing that than their Democrat and left-wing counterparts.
Well, it's not only that. The left is so good at spinning tails, right? That if we only increase taxes, we'll be able to improve the economy. If we only increase regulations and limit what you do, you'll be happier. They spin these tales that make no sense. Whereas Republicans and conservatives, we try to speak facts and objectively, and then we don't tell a good story. Look, I studied economics. I love to pull out my supply and demand curves, but that's not a good story. We've got to be able to do better at telling our story, of course, but the left is never held to account for their tail spinning. The media is happy to indulge the radical left and encourage them to say more silly things. But that's the reality. What we can't do is wallow in that reality. We've got to figure out how to win. You have to figure out how to get beyond, NBC and CBS and and NPR and how to speak to everyday Americans directly and persuasively. You know, we're the people who know that freedom produces good things. We're the people who know that if we believe in a creator, that is the way to have a stable society where we know right from wrong. If we don't follow those basic rules, things fall apart quickly into these horrible sort of utopias worlds where only the elite, you know, have resources and the rest of us are there to serve their needs.
You know, you brought up a good point about the way that we need to talk to the American public. I think conservatives are very good when it comes to data points, but we are not that good, I don't think, on the emotional narrative that goes with it. So what we might have all the figures on cancer and explain why one program is better than the other side might come out and say something like, look at this poor little child, we have to give so much money to this program. The child whose face is shown, you know, crying on air will supersede any type of factual information the other side puts out. It seems to me that many conservative candidates don't get this. We're thinking, we're intellectuals, we understand what the issues are, and we tend to talk at a level that I don't think reaches the people. And when you look at our J schools, our journalism schools in this country, they're led by the progressive left. They're so far left that they really become more of storytelling organizations than they are of reporting organizations or teaching people how to report the news. What do we do? Is there a place that conservatives can go to learn how to get the message out?
Look, there are a number of good organizations that are trying to help in this space. How better to communicate to the American public? But you're right. I so naturally think about the social science, and I can point to all of the scientific studies that show that these various government programs are actually counterproductive. But that's not telling a compelling story. Those are valuable data points that you and I find persuasive. But the average American, they're going to focus more on the picture of a child crying. Well, of course, what we know is that the child is crying because those programs don't work, because families have broken down. Yeah, and we need to be able to have a compelling story about why freedom and strong families and a strong economy, why those are what produce happy and healthy outcomes for people. And it ought to be easier than it is, but it's, yeah, the deck is stacked against us.
Conservatives can win an election or two, but can we win the long range if we don't take back education? Because frankly, when we look at the propaganda that's being instilled in our children, now from kindergarten straight through the PhD level, it doesn't bode well for the future. You know, we would have to almost undo 16, 20 years of education in order to gain back the trust that these kids have in the hard left.
You're exactly right, Frank. It is impossible for us to win if the propaganda continues. But what I'm seeing out there all over the country, when I go around, I'm seeing that everyday Americans now understand better than ever before what this critical race theory is all about, what the Marxist leadership of Black Lives Matter, what they're really all about. And you know this. Your listeners tell you all the time that they are now getting really upset about what they're seeing in these schools. This is the opportunity for Americans to say, no more of this socialism, no more of this Marxism, no more of blaming America for everything, when America, in fact, is the greatest country ever established on earth. So this is the opportunity for Americans to rise up and say, enough, we have had it. We are taking back our school board. We're taking back our city commission. We're taking back the U.S. Congress. By the way, in the next election, 2022, that is going to be Nancy Pelosi's farewell song. You know, I fully expect the Republican Party to take back the House of Representatives and finally end the speakership of Nancy Pelosi. And then, of course, our job will be to make sure that the Republicans in the House, stiffen up.
Mhm.
Earlier, Daria was asking about why it is Republicans operate a certain way. Well, you look at the leadership in Congress, and they too often, the Republican leadership in Congress, they too often think you've got to pick the battles that you can win. Well, that's not how the Democrats in Congress think. They pick every single battle they can have. They fight every single inch of the territory. Well, if Republicans are only going to fight on a handful of issues and Democrats fight on everything, that means that Democrats are winning most of the issues without even a fight. We have got to learn how to fight every single thing and fight effectively.
Well, I want to tell a quick anecdotal story. A relative of mine, young, going to school on the West Coast, thought she was pretty liberal, even though she was raised in a conservative family. And I've been talking to her a lot lately. She's about 22, 23 years old, so typical college student age. And I would get all of the liberal arguments, about that you would hear constantly coming out of the Obama administration. Well, I noticed something different. Since the fall of last year, she's been talking about the fact that she's disillusioned with the left, that the left isn't really doing what they say, that she doesn't have the choices that she thought she would have, that they really are stopping her free speech because if she doesn't agree with something they say, she gets canceled, and she thought she was one of them. I got a call from her the other day, and lo and behold, she said, you know what? Donald Trump won the election. I'm sure of it. I think the left cheated. We need Donald Trump back. I'm not commenting on whether we do or we don't with Donald Trump, but I was so shocked to hear this kid who's going to a liberal California school in Los Angeles come out and start to say she's seen through the garbage that the left is pushing. I think there are a lot of people now, even at that young college age, who have been fed what you can only call garbage and are starting to see through it now, especially with the pandemic. Do you see young people today starting to throw off the veil and look to really see what's happening?
Yeah, we are seeing that. And young people want to save the planet. They want to end racism, and they want people to be happy. And they've been fed the lines from the left that the left has the answers to save the planet, to make sure that people are happy, and that racism will come to an end. Well, the left has never had answers to any of those questions. The left has always made those problems worse, not better. We need a healthy culture where people understand right from wrong, that people understand how to respect each other. And that is the first fundamental pillar of how to produce a good society. And all of those ideas are based in this idea of conservatism, where we respect the role of the individual, that we acknowledge that there is a role for government, but that role is limited. And when we create a system like this correctly, that's when we have the best outcomes. Never perfect, right? We're never going to have heaven on earth, but this is the way to help people live their lives as peacefully and with as much dignity and prosperity as possible.
Dan, before we let you go, and I will give you one more chance to give all the appropriate website information, but I just want to ask you one off-topic question, perhaps. During the Reagan administration or during Reagan's campaigns, um, what worked so well for him was bringing together not only domestic issues from a conservative perspective, but illuminating the danger that he saw from then the Soviet Union. It seems today we're not talking a lot about the imminent military danger from this new conglomerate of Russia and China working together. Should conservatives do more to follow Reagan's example and start talking more about foreign dangers as well as domestic dangers?
Yeah, well, Frank, at CPAC, it was probably 6 years ago, we had a panel on our main stage. The title of it was, "When Did World War III Begin?" We understood that World War III had already begun. It was just being fought in a different way. But we are getting thousands of attacks every day coming from China and Russia and Iran, attacking our infrastructure, attacking our grid, attacking our computer software systems, attacking our privacy rights, data. These attacks are aggressive, they're costly, and they do in fact cause the loss of life. World War III, in many respects, began a long time ago, but most Americans don't acknowledge it or don't recognize it. But we have got to win this battle, and I think lots of people will focus on Hunter Biden and his dealings with China. That's really just a drop in the bucket. Maybe it's a good example, but the massive assaults by the Chinese Communist Party on America are happening every second of every day. The Iranians and the Russians and the Venezuelans, they are attacking us too, every day, every minute. But this is a dangerous time, and Americans have to understand what's really going on.
Before we go, Dan, give us the information on how to reach the Center to Protect Voters and the ACU.
Okay, so conservative.org is the webpage, and from there you can find everything that you need to about ACU, including the next CPAC Part 2, taking place in Texas in July, our new Center to Protect Voters and Their Voices. That's designed to rebuild our election laws, but it's also designed to push back on all these corporations that are trying to silence us. We are aggressively fighting for freedom, and we need your help. Please sign up, be a volunteer, help us financially if you can. But be in this fight. Join us at CPAC in Texas too.
Thanks, Dan. Look forward to seeing you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
When you compare, I think that formula that Reagan put together, I think it's important that comes back. And, one of the things, I didn't want to push the point too much, but I do believe that the conservatives have lost a number of golden opportunities. During the first year or so of the Trump administration, much of the agenda that the people voted vigorously for was not pushed. Just as Dan said, they decided to just look at one or two issues and take care of those and not really go over, all the other issues. Part of the problem, frankly, is that while the Democrats might disagree, they come together as a solid group to do shared goals. In those first years, for example, of the Trump administration, we really didn't see a lot of unity on a number of issues. Frankly, I think Paul Ryan didn't do a great job. I think a lot of Republicans in the House were reluctant to push a conservative agenda, even though that's what got them elected and got President Trump elected in the first place. And I think it was unfortunate that Republican appointees in the Department of Justice haven't really been more vigorous in demanding an end to the corruption that we've seen in organizations like the IRS, like the Department of Justice itself with its long-term liberal appointees. We saw how the IRS attacked the Tea Party. We've seen the Department of Justice attack conservative think tanks. That's got to stop. And I think that we perhaps need to do, or Republicans need to do a better job in getting their appointees in those positions, because frankly, we can talk all we want, but unless we really block what the left is doing illegally in this country, particularly in terms of cheating on elections, particularly in terms of harassing people with different points of view, then I don't think we're really going to win those long-range battles.
I agree with you, Frank. And there's something else that we need to do, and that is go back to moral behavior, moral ethics, what is called typically moral intuitions, those things you don't have to think about, you just automatically know are right and wrong. For instance, you don't steal, you don't kill people, things like that. We have been told too often in this society that everybody gets to make up their own rules, do whatever they want, everything is acceptable. The reality is it's not. And if we don't have morality within the society, and I'm not talking about judging if someone goes to church on Sunday or something like that, but just those general moral intuitions, if we don't abide by those and teach it to the next generation, they are not going to, in the next generation, have good people to put into office, have good people that are working in the business communities, have good people that are willing to serve others for the good of the people rather than their own self-interest. I think it goes back beyond even just getting good people in government. I think it goes back again to the family unit and to talking about how we raise our children. Because for too long, since World War II up through the 60s, and even to now, Frank, that we've developed this sort of everything goes attitude. And I think that is actually destructive, not constructive for this country.
I don't know if we can put all the blame on parents. I think when you look at the, and I'll be blunt, garbage that kids are being taught in schools, when we look at the influence of China on college campuses, when we look, for example, at even grammar school curriculum, where if a teacher says Merry Christmas or Happy Hanukkah, they get in trouble. But if they want to teach trans sex practices to first graders, that's somehow acceptable.
But why aren't the parents out there, Frank, saying this is not acceptable in my local school?
I think it's a
I
case of
do think
parents.
that parents need to be educated in what they can do to control their own local schools. They need to pick up their voice and their bags and go out and be right in the middle of that classroom if they have to. And I think that's starting to happen. And I suppose I'm almost yelling on the air today because it's one of my pet peeves, but I think it's starting to happen when parents recognize that during these remote classes, the teachers are not allowing the parents to be in the same room as the child. What is going on that a parent can't see what a child is being taught? That immediately tells me something is wrong.
Yeah, I mean, if you ever take a look at some of the textbooks, particularly the so-called history textbooks, you'll find that in many cases there are deep factual errors and there's hardcore left-wing propaganda in that. Um, I recall when my daughter was in high school, I browsed her history textbook, and when they had the next parent-teacher night, I went and I literally got into an argument with her history teacher saying, this is objectively wrong. You have incorrect data here, and you are teaching ideology to kids, which is not supported by the facts, which is simply wrong. Hey, Daria, let's go to our next guest. Patrick Wood is the founder and director of the Citizens for Free Speech, which is a nationwide nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting and defending the First Amendment. Wood is also the editor of Technocracy News and Trends, a worldwide journal dedicated to critical analysis of technocracy and globalization. Patrick, welcome to the program.
Hey, good to be with you. Thank you.
Let me start off with something we talked about with our other guest. That was Dan Schneider, the executive director of the ACU. We've just seen the Biden administration begin a proposal to hire private companies to monitor what they consider extremist chatter on the internet. And we all know from watching the news that the left considers anyone who disagrees with them an extremist. How serious a threat is this to the whole concept of free speech in America?
This is extremely disturbing and serious. And the concept that people need to grasp is that the government is now entering into a partnership with these big tech censoring companies to weaponize government functions against American people. This is absolutely unacceptable in America. And most people still don't grasp what's going on. And they think, well, it's just the big tech companies. It's not going to affect me. It's just those big companies that, like Parler got killed by Amazon and Google and Apple a few weeks ago. And, oh, that's just Parler. They're big companies, not me. Here's the deal. This machine is coming for every single American. And there will be a time when it arrives at your door and you'll be very sorry that you didn't do something about it before it knocked on your door. But it's coming.
We've seen CNN now admit that their whole corporate approach in 2020 was to prevent the re-election of Donald Trump, and that they tilted their news stories precisely to that end. When the average American puts in a full day's work, comes home, cooks dinner, and their whole image of the news is maybe that 30 minutes they get on NBC or CBS or ABC. How do we reach those folks and tell them what you've been listening to is pure propaganda? It's absolute nonsense. It seems that the Republicans don't put on the same emphasis on reaching Americans that the left does on a daily basis.
Well, they don't. And this is part of the problem with the political process, I suppose. It's so polarized right now that nobody in Washington, D.C. especially can do anything for people that live out here in the country. And this has been demonstrated for the last 45, 50 years for sure in my lifetime that, Washington isn't going to save us. They're the problem. They're not the solution. The only solution we have is with people on a local level, I'm afraid, at this point. And a lot can be done at the local level to drive the craziness out of your own community. That's where you could actually get face to face with your leaders, talk to them. And if you don't like what they say, get rid of them. Or you can try and persuade them to a different, perhaps to a different outcome. But those who just sit back and do nothing from now on are going to be part of the problem themselves, because we need them to stand up, get a backbone, stand up and start confronting this stuff all over the country.
You talked about the fact that a lot of Americans go to work, come home, they're taking care of their families. For many Americans that I'm going to call middle of the road to conservative Americans, it's not all about political action. And I've talked to a lot of people that say, of course, I'm part of that silent majority. I believe in the things you're saying, but I'm not interested in participating. I don't want to be part of the antipathy of, I don't want to be part of the negativity. And I hear all these excuses. What do you say to people to get them to recognize that we've come to a point in time in this country where we're really on that precipice? It's now or never.
It really is. And here's the truism that everybody can understand. The First Amendment is all about communication. All 5 subpoints in the First Amendment, from freedom of worship, freedom of, to exercise religion, to free speech, to freedom of the press, the right to assemble peaceably, etc. Every one of those has to do with communication. The founders of our country expected us to be communicating and talking to each other. And of course, the first part of it, freedom to worship, is talking with God. But they knew that if a country did not communicate within itself, that it would die. That's why they made the First Amendment first. That's a very key thing to understand. Secondly, the truism of life is when communication stops, the fighting starts. Ask anybody who's ever been divorced, well, what happened to your marriage? You look like you're doing so good. I mean, what went wrong? You will hear every single time, communication failed. Well, she wouldn't talk to me anymore. Well, he froze me out. He never came, he wasn't around. He wouldn't talk to me. Every single time, it always is communication failed. Communication is failing in America, and we're about to receive the outcome of that, which is going to be the death of our country. The fighting is going to start. It's going to rip the fabric of our country apart. We must restore and guard and protect our rights under the First Amendment. This is what Citizens for Free Speech is all about. And I hate to say, isn't it ironic that an organization like ours even has to exist in America?
Mhm.
It really is. When I was running for U.S. Congress, I would go into the high school sometimes to try to talk to students. And I found a very difficult time of it because they stopped having Republican and Democratic political clubs. And the reason I was told they have only political clubs is because they don't want conflict. What I don't understand is if you don't learn how to debate the issues, if you don't learn how to work for the people that support the opinions that you hold, isn't the country lost? Don't we need to learn again how to have civil debate, how to talk about these issues, what the First Amendment even means to people? When I was teaching at the university, for instance, we were told there were areas of campus where there were free speech zones. When I was in school, every part of America was a free speech zone except my parents' dinner table where my dad ruled. But outside of that, everywhere I could voice my opinion and know that I was free to do it. How do we get people thinking again that America is about free speech everywhere?
Well, you've nailed it. And one of our, in fact, the most singular project that we have working at Citizens for Free Speech is a training program to train people how to communicate, just like you're speaking, in the civic arena, and just, talking with people maybe that you don't agree with, how to have a civil conversation and yet make your point salient and persuade people to your position. This training is necessary because people have lost the skills of having civil discourse and having any kind of critical discourse where they're thinking, logically about an issue. And on the other hand, these are learnable skills, and we're desperately pedaling as fast as we can to help people regain those skills so they can get back out in their community with confidence and have these discussions that should have been had all along, but they haven't been.
Wouldn't you say to some extent that the left wants to restrict free speech because in a real free speech debate, their points are not going to do very well? Look, Marxism has been tried in just about every inhabited continent over the past 120 something years, and it's always failed. And yet, if you bring up that point, there's really not much left in the leftist argument. They want us to become, for example, Venezuela. Venezuelans, the Marxists there, they packed their Supreme Court, just what the left wants to do in the United States. They had a more socialist version of economics, which is exactly what the left wants to do in the United States. They just they can't really win that debate. And so the only way they win the debate is by cutting off debate altogether.
Well, it is. And let me point out that in the last 150 years, every single revolution in the world, and I don't care what the flavor was, whether it was Marxism, communism, socialism, or fascism, it doesn't matter. Now we're facing technocracy, but that's another story. Every single revolution in the last 150 years has started out with one event, and that is the conquering or takeover of the media of the target country or area that's being taken over. The radio stations get taken over, the newspapers get taken over. When TV came in, TV stations get taken over, and the people get taken out in the street, shot or thrown out. Books are burned to destroy history. And this is exactly what's happening in America right now, around the world too, but we're Americans, we're concerned with our country. This is what's going on in America right now. Electronic book burning, censoring of all opposition. And you say, well, where's the revolution? Well, it's coming. It may not be the same kind of revolution we've had in the past, but if you look at the World Economic Forum, for instance, and the Great Reset and the Green New Deal and stuff like that that's going on, you can see the freight train coming, and it's necessary for them to shut everybody else up. And that's what's happening today across America.
Patrick, in order to do what you're saying, we need to educate America's youth, who are going to be the future majority of the country, the future politicians, the future mothers and fathers. We need to educate them so that they understand this point. But to be quite frank with you, I find it very difficult to name more than 2 or 3 universities in the entire country where I would say they have a balanced program and have free speech as you and I know it. What do we do about that if we don't have education?
The only thing you can do about schools that do not support the values that America treasures is simply just isolate them and forget them. There's nothing we can do to change them. It took too long to get them where they are now. Nobody's going to come in and say, well, you need to change all your hiring policies. You need to get rid of half the people you've got on staff from teaching. It's not going to happen. It has to, if anything's going to happen, it has to happen from the ground up in our local communities and make changes there where you can get your hands around people, that are serving in elected positions and appointed positions, hold their feet to the fire. And in fact, everybody at a national, state, or regional level came from somebody's local community. They had the opportunity when they were there to make an impression on their life, and yet they didn't. And then they get off and they say, well, they go to college and they come out, well, I'm going to go be a teacher at Tulane University or whatever. And I'm going to teach, my socialist philosophy there. And, you say, well, what happened? Well, the guy came from somewhere and nobody really went out and challenged him and straightened him out before he got loose on society.
To what extent do conservatives free speech advocates need to really become more vigorous? If one of us said something off color, there would be demonstrations at our front door. Conservatives tend to not do that sort of thing. Do we as conservatives need to become more active, more vigorous, more vocal? Daria mentioned before how we tend not to be that way. We tend to be more individualistic. We don't get together as groups. But is the writing on the wall? Do we have to start being in many ways as militant as our counterparts on the left?
I don't believe that that's the answer right now, to be militant per se. Usually, well, I should say, my grandma used to say, you catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. I don't know that arguing with people is ever going to, win any arguments per se. The concept of free speech and expression of ideas has to be made a lifestyle. It has to be something that people exercise 24/7. Everywhere they go, everybody they communicate with, they need to learn how to communicate effectively with people to get them to change their way of thinking. Most of the time, you just can't go up and slap somebody in the face and say, you're stupid, you need to think this other way. They're not going to listen to you, and they're probably going to slap you back. So some other approach needs to be taken to persuade people and to show them the fallacy of where they are, or the things that they're, basing their life on and stuff, in a way that they will begin to accept the ideas as their own. And when that happens, you really persuaded somebody. When they accept an idea as their own, and they say, gee, look what I thought up, and you smile inside, and then they go off and they'll persuade other people to the position as well. This is the way it's been in America for 250 plus years. And this is where we need to get back to. It's a lifestyle. It's not just an event. It's not even a series of events. It needs to be made a lifestyle for people to get involved with others around them and be a beacon, be a light, if you will, to them.
One of the things that's concerning me right now when you talk about lifestyle is something that's happening in this country that really hasn't happened before. And that's that people are moving their homes and their families out of areas where they politically don't agree with people. And in a sense, abandoning the coast for the inland if they're conservative. If people are more liberal, heading into New England, New York, or the West Coast, California. If people are so segregated by their beliefs, how are we ever going to get the country to heal and work together as one unit if it's the coastal areas versus the flyover states? How do we pull people together when they're geographically dispersed?
You're right. This is the problem. Admittedly, I've thought about this a lot myself, and I know a lot of people that live in California that are just desperate to get out of there, and for good reason. I mean, you can understand why. It's costing them an arm and a leg to stay there. If they have a business, they're regulated to death. They end up, working 24/7 almost, and they end up with peanuts. They want to get out. But you're right. When people flee, you end up with a segment of society geographically segmented, and that can only lead to more, as communication fails especially, that can only lead to more bitter conflict between states. And you can even see this is kind of, the setting that started the Civil War back over 100 years ago, 150 years ago. And, people just couldn't talk to each other, and they were so divided. They said, well, let's fight it out on the battlefield. I hope we never get to that point, honestly. I never want to see that in America again.
Patrick, where can our listeners, our audience, find out more about the Citizens for Free Speech?
And they can go to our website, citizensforfreespeech.org, and join up. We encourage everybody to get started. Even if you don't want to do anything today, at least put your name on the line and stand with us and say you support the First Amendment and free speech and what we're trying to do in America. We are a nonprofit organization, by the way. We're not, we are owned in a sense by the citizens of America. We need every citizen to get involved with us if we're going to solve this problem.
Thanks so much. We look forward to our next conversation.
My pleasure, sir, anytime.
And to our audience, thanks for tuning in.
We welcome our newest radio affiliate, Net Talk America, in Washington, D.C. at 96.7 FM. We're broadcast throughout the United States on radio and television and worldwide on the web. Watch us on Roku, the public broadcast stations, and on the AM/FM 247.com network. You can access the program anytime on our website at usagovpolicy.com. Join us again next week. We're sponsored by the New York Analysis of Policy and Government, a division of the American Analysis of News and Media, Inc., at usagovpolicy.com and the Institute for American Politics. Email us at truthinradio@gmail.com.
Our producer is the amazing Abigail White, and our director is the brilliant Jim Hansen.